Good day. Welcome back to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness, conversations and reflections on sobriety, spirituality, and the intersection of these wonderfully challenging life processes and the relationships that make them up. Outer Circle Inner Stillness, again, is a listener-supported production of New Pattern Counseling with some support from Fircrest Behavioral Health. Fircrest Behavioral Health, our neighbors in Vancouver, they're wonderful people. And you too can be one of our wonderful people through the wonders of patreon.com. Anyway, we are here. I'm here with Dr. Jeremiah Peck from Ally Academy Northwest and have a very interesting conversation today. I'm excited for that. But yes, Jeremiah, welcome to the show. Very nice to see you.
Thank you for having me, Reese.
Yeah. So would you like to say a little bit about, who you are, what's your corner of the counseling world, what is Ally Academy Northwest, and what's important to you there?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a bit about myself. I am a licensed counselor, both in the states of Washington and Oregon. Also run a group practice in Washington. We have about 15 staff. That's Ally Christian Counseling. As well as the director of Ally Academy Northwest, as you mentioned. And Ally Academy is a professional resource for counselors to receive consultation, supervision, and continuing education. In addition to a few of these hats, also a counselor educator, a core faculty in a counseling program in Portland, Oregon.
That's a few hats. So, yeah, that's really, I really appreciate what you invest into the counseling community. I know a thing we talked about, you did a long study. Was it your dissertation that was on counselor burnout or?
Yeah, clergy burnout specifically, but really it looked at, burnout for helping professions and a lot of the research. There's a tremendous overlap between, say, the work that clergy does in their spiritual care for their congregations and the helping profession of counseling too. There's a lot of overlap there.
I would definitely agree. I think especially as I've had some, whenever I've had like longer term clients, it's often taken on a little bit more, it can take on more of that pastoral feel of like, well, you're not really in crisis anymore. And we're not really like teaching you new skills as much as just like kind of navigating life together, because life is complicated and sometimes you just need some perspective. I don't really qualify for like older yet, and hopefully, I don't know if I'm like wiser or not, but I can definitely be like outside your normal life and give you that perspective. So that can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yes. So one of the reasons I was interested in talking to you, well, enjoy your company, but also, so you have some experience working with couples. Is that true?
Yes. Most of my clinical background in working with clients directly has been working with couples. And I somehow, Reese, developed what I like to call an unintentional reputation in sort of the Clark County, Washington area of being a referral source specifically for high conflict couples. It was really as such for a number of years that number of counselors in the community, when they would see a couple in the community, they would sort of do an assessment, and then I would get a phone call to say, hey, I have a referral for you. And it was an unintentional specialization for a number of years. But a lot of my clinical background has been working with couples.
That's really fun. And I'm really thankful for this, because so I don't work with couples primarily, and actually for a long time have kind of joking, not joking, had this thought of like, I don't work with couples, kind of like I don't do windows, because I didn't love the energy for it, or I didn't love the energy that comes in a room with a couple. But some people really love that, and that's really cool, because there's not very many of you. So with that though, say a little bit more. So what would qualify a couple as a high conflict couple?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It would distinguish high conflict couples from other couples that might come and seek counseling. I think even among couples counselors, there's some maybe spoken, maybe unspoken categories that can fit into. Some couples, maybe a small minority of clients might come in looking for relationship enrichment. That is to say, maybe things are going well, they want to go from good to great. That's not most couples. Most couples might come in saying they need to work on things like communication. A response that I often get, it's sort of a standard response when I ask folks, hey, why are we here today? Tends to be, oh, we're looking for tools. We hit a few bumps and potholes in our journey. We're looking for some tools, right? Then there's this category maybe, which I'll sort of loosely define as high conflict, where the couple just experienced some major crisis. Maybe it's an event. Maybe it was a past series of events that has not really been processed or dealt with, that has led to resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness. It doesn't have to be something that just happened last week. It can be something that's been festering for a number of years, but the couple hasn't addressed. But it has led to, as I mentioned, barriers and walls and defensiveness, perhaps just a great deal of disconnection in the relationship.
All right. So a high conflict, there really is this sense of there's been crisis and some things. So I kind of get the sense of that. It feels like a lot of the like the social media like marriage advice is aimed toward people who are like fighting over who leaves the socks at the bottom of the bed. Which I don't know, for me, like in my world, that just in a sense feels kind of insulting, because it's like the couples that I have ended up brushing up against, they're dealing with things like infidelity and integrity abuse, or actual abuse. Well, that's not a fair way to say it, like, because abuse is abuse. Integrity abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, those can all happen. They're all really real and really, really dangerous. But yeah, but the same advice, it seems like you need different categories of advice for people who are like kind of miscommunicating over like who has to fold the socks versus like, do I get to cheat on you or not? These do feel like kind of different things. So
yeah, and that's something that probably is a misconception, but there's a lot of awareness building around that. Years ago, there was a great little YouTube video that was kind of went viral in its sort of niche audience. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I'll plug it because it's just a really neat resource. It's called "It's Not About the Nail," and not to give too much away, but the point is this couple is sort of in conflict, and it looks like from one person's perspective it's about this nail, and the other person's saying, no, it's not about this nail. You're just not listening to me and hearing me. Well, that's sort of used in the couples counseling dynamic to say most couples have these topics, whether it's the socks, the dishes, the chores, who does these errands. And often in couples counseling, we're peeling back that layer and saying, it is about that. And it may be what that represents, maybe some underlying emotions associated with that. So we're both validating the present, the external, the situational, and then exploring the underlying.
okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, it's not it's not about the socks. But I guess like that detail's an easy one to miss, because I guess those socks really stink or something. But anyway, so okay, so some of my interest, I think, is more in the high conflict couple arena, and again, so I don't specifically work with couples doing couples counseling, although I will sometimes meet with a couple to do coupleship work. And the way that I loosely define that, it's kind of teaching a couple how to be in recovery together. And again, my setting is, working with recovery. So where there's been addiction, where there's been infidelity, where there's been betrayal, where there's been abuse, where there's, bipolar tendencies, borderline tendencies, emotional manipulation, gaslighting, things like that. So, definitely, deep below the sock pile. And a common scenario I'll get into is a scenario where both people have been really terrible to each other in some ways. So say in a man-woman dynamic, it might be, he has porn addiction, he's cheated, she's been really controlling, she's really mean. He's not really great at communicating or opening up. She's not really trusting. one or the other might be really demanding, one or the other might be like seriously withdrawn from like, physical touch or emotional connection, and they just get stuck in these cycles of like, essentially like, I think it's mostly the other person's fault. I'm trying to show up. I'm kind of waiting for them to like show up and like reciprocate something. And gosh darn it, why wouldn't you meet my needs? And they just seem to get stuck in these cycles where they are like kind of deadlocked in that way. And so where I can get them is I can get them into the realm of like, okay, let's speak nicely. Let's use I statements. Let's, speak kind of courteously to each other. But I still feel like there's just this like stuckness that some couples get into. And I guess that's where I'd be curious, your perspective. So when a couple is now working through a crisis or recovering from a crisis, what do you see are some like common mistakes that a couple might make, and to be countered with what are a couple essentials that couples should be doing to get themselves unstuck?
Yeah, great question. A few things is there are these sort of myths, maybe not myths, but misconceptions. I'll just say, even in relationship enrichment or communication, and you made reference to one of them actually, this idea of I statements. And when a couple's truly in crisis, the advice, the direction of, hey, let's try to build these I statements can still be weaponized. It's not a silver bullet by any means. In fact, taking a statement, you are being rude or you are being a jerk, and turning it into, I think you are being a jerk, is an I statement, and it still has much of the same impact. So that's one of the sort of the misconceptions in couples counseling, and I actually hear this from other couples counselors that they sort of camp on that I statement hill when there's so much more about exploring the underlying experience, which I'll get to in just a moment. But the second maybe don't is an overemphasis on emotions without actually sharing what those emotions are. Oftentimes, couples will communicate what I refer to as pseudo feelings or pseudo feeling statements. And this also happens in couples counseling when a counselor would say, okay, do I statements and tell the other person how you feel. And then they'll say something like, well, I just feel like you're never around, or I feel like you're not listening to me. Well, what they've done, right, is, and you've heard this, by saying feel like, and this happens too when you say I feel that, or I feel as though, they've actually changed the feeling statement back into a thought. When you say to someone, I feel like you're never around, that's actually not an emotion, and you haven't told them how you feel. So it results in the same, to speak from a like neuroanatomy perspective, it appeals to the same area of the brain that evaluates the statement as content. And that's why someone gets defensive when they hear you're never around. I feel like you're never around. The part of their brain that evaluates content says, well, exhibit A, we're in court now. I was around last week. Here's my evidence to defend myself. And then the other person experiences the defensiveness and says, you always do this. You always get defensive when all I'm trying to do is tell you how I feel. And then I say, hold on, let's pause. Hearing a few things. One is like the absolute statements, the always and never. Two is that attack defense cycle, Reese, that you made reference to. And three, I then coach and teach the couple how to use effective feeling statements, which aren't these pseudo feelings, the feel like, feel that, feel as though, but instead to use genuine core emotions. I feel lonely. I feel insecure. I feel vulnerable. And, perhaps for those watching or listening, even hearing those things has such a different impact on the hearer, the listener, than I feel like you're never around. The emotional element, the core emotion, has a way, again, speaking with neuroanatomy, has a way of infiltrating our capacity to experience compassion, empathy, and understanding, which is actually what we want in the face of conflict.
That shift feels really powerful. And even when you were saying the words, like shifting from I feel like you're never around to, I feel lonely, like lonely just captures like a whole lot more imagery, a lot more color, a lot more sensation, like automatically conjures up more memories, even for me, the listener right now hearing it. So, yeah, I've become aware in my practice of, here's some jargon terms. We talk about this, right brain affective attunement. But there's a lot of neuroscience built into how we attach and how we connect, and it is really built on that emotional connection. This like, I feel like you're doing this. I feel that you're never doing that. It seems like that content is much more offensive because it's more bristly, and it's easier to hear content and then throw more content back, get into like debate mode, which seems like that would just perpetuate the cycle. But it seems a lot harder when faced with someone else's vulnerability. Like, you can't defend against that. It seems like what I've observed typically when someone really truly is like vulnerable like that, it's an invitation for the other person to likewise be vulnerable. And I suppose a huge red flag if the other person doesn't reciprocate that at that point. But a lot of times they do, and a lot of times vulnerability begets more vulnerability. So those core emotion words, they do seem like they'd be really essential.
Yeah. And there is still a context, right, where if there's been a tremendous amount of injury, the other partner might not fully trust in the moment that vulnerability. They could experience it like it's a trap, they're just luring them in. It can also be taken, sometimes, you made reference to this, sometimes in relationship dynamics. And I want to use these terms in the truest clinical sense. I do believe that there's a little bit of trendy pop psych around these terms right now, at least as I've seen this kind of monitoring the consumer trends right now. But when we think about true clinical narcissistic personality disorder or true clinical borderline personality disorder, sometimes the experience of those individuals in relationship can be that difficulty in trusting, or, in the case of narcissism, where some emotionality is used in a coercive or manipulative way. So sometimes there's reasons for some initial apprehension, even to that vulnerability that you're speaking of. And in part, that's why it's so exceedingly helpful to navigate these relational dynamics with a professional counselor, as opposed to simply relying on some static resources, either books, videos, things on the internet. While those things can be helpful, really having a skilled mental health counselor to also assess for these other clinical diagnoses that may be happening co-occurrently is a real benefit to explore.
I'd be curious to hear more about this. So, some couples might say, "Hey, we found this good book, or a couple of good books. We're reading a couple of good books together," and there are certainly some very good books. And other clients, might go the route of like, "Well, we just need to pray more, or we just need to like go to church together more." Which, and again, from within my tradition, I mean, no argument there. Go to church. But it would be curious, what would be some reasons where those things just aren't quite enough, or why would a person need a professional on top of a robust prayer life, and on top of reading together, or on top of spending time with other more healthily married people?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. The reality is there are a variety of things which can be helpful for a couple. And I would also say that couples counseling in itself isn't the magic solution either. There are folks that will find restoration, forgiveness, healing in a variety of those things that you mentioned. It's not to say that couples counseling is essential or even appropriate for every couple in every situation. However, it can offer specific tools, insights that are unique to that experience. For instance, by reading a book or engaging in community, you may not get the opportunity to dialogue, to interface with a more so objective third party who has the clinical skills to assess for some underlying, whether it's personality disorders like we already referenced, or even the impact of underlying traumas, past experiences that might be manifesting in the context of the relationship. I think books and resources are really great for skill building. Community is really great for fostering support. There's also a tremendous, just from a social psychology standpoint, a tremendous benefit in social learning and modeling that comes through community support. So I wouldn't say couples counseling replaces those things. And for people of faith, their sincerely held spiritual convictions and experience, when we talk about the function of hope, spirituality has a tremendous impact on couples' well-being and their resilience in the relational dynamic. And in addition to all of those things being healthy and helpful, potentially, couples counseling with a professional offers this space to get a certain kind of insight, that psychological insight, to talk with someone who is a private, confidential, professionally bound person that you're going to be talking potentially about intimate things, things regarding your sex life, things regarding finances, things regarding underlying childhood traumas, which some people, maybe most people, don't readily talk about in some other social contexts. And this is a safe space for that.
That would make sense. It's the nature of going to see a specialist. Like, I wouldn't talk to my dentist about my mechanical problems in my car unless he's a supremely, Renaissance person of a dentist or something. But yeah, that would make sense though. Like, it would be good to have community, and it would be good for us to spend time with people who've been married, 40, 50 years, just to see, like, how did you do it? But those people aren't going to be trained necessarily to offer pastoral care, or they're not going to have necessarily language for, neuroscientifically what goes on when you yell at each other. But like a counselor could. It could. I'm thinking about, when my wife and I have spent time with our counselor, it's very much like we're learning how our nervous systems work. And that in itself isn't the healing work, and we could say the healing comes from God, but the knowledge of what's going on in the brain doesn't hurt by any means. It creates more of a space where more insight can come. So that's been helpful for us.
And that insight can be really profoundly impactful, just for couples to know the why something is happening behind the what, is one phrase that I use. You made reference to this idea of couples getting in unhealthy cycles, maybe attack defense cycles. A lot of couples will use the vicious cycle a metaphor. And the reality is, just by building awareness can give them an opportunity to change or even break that cycle, to make a different response. One way that I phrase it with couples is we're trying to facilitate opportunities where you thoughtfully respond instead of react. And to quote Viktor Frankl, he cites this idea that between stimulus and response, so between something happening and you having a reaction, there's a space, and that space is your ability to choose. And your ability to choose widens through increased awareness. So the idea is the more awareness you have of the why behind the what, that you have a greater capacity for choosing a response instead of having a reaction.
Right. But then that all hinges on having that pause or doing something to cultivate that pause. And I guess here we could insert, mindfulness technique of choice. Count to 10, take a deep breath, do finger taps, say the Jesus prayer, whatever you got to do to slow down, and not say the first thing that comes to mind. That's where that becomes useful.
Sure.
Yeah. So we mentioned, I think we've hinted at some of the kind of spiritual or spiritualizing, pitfalls of, oh, we should just pray about this more, which you should, or let's just, trust God to work a miracle, which that's not quite how trusting works. But I'm thinking about, especially for clients of faith, or people of faith. I know sometimes we'll really quickly reach for the F word, the forgiveness word. Just forgive him, just forgive her, which is, again, it's complex because yes, that's a super vital thing, but I think it is also really poorly understood. Kind of next to this idea of like kindness. Like there's some value, I think, in people should just be nice to each other. Like in the handful of couples that I've worked with a little bit, like I can really tell the difference. Like the couples that are like genuinely like nice to each other, gentle to each other, they seem like they have something that these other couples don't. Even though like the level of hurt is comparable. So I guess I'd be curious your thoughts on like, here's these kind of really big, loaded, misunderstood, like spiritual sort of words that get thrown into couples conversations. I guess what would be your take on how to handle those more appropriately?
Yeah. And that's a really great point. I think oftentimes in response to, this metaphorical or hypothetical couple that I referenced earlier, the couple that comes in and says, we just want tools, is most people, individuals included, are sort of looking for the tips, tricks, and strategies. So what do I do? And the relational dynamic is really as such, and I think you're alluding to this, Reese, that it's not exclusively what someone does, whether that's forgiveness or to navigate conflict in a certain way, but there's this underlying posture. You referenced it as this idea of kindness or niceness. It reminds me of the work of John Gottman, and I don't think this is this is too far extending what Gottman intends for this to be used by, but your statement reminded me of his concept of a positive sentiment override. And that is, he'd studied two couples that were going through a similar crisis or conflict. And it wasn't just that one couple had tools and the other couple didn't. It's that the relational, this isn't his word, but the relational satisfaction maybe between the couple, their positive sentiment that they had towards each other was a significant factor in their ability and capacity to overcome or resolve that conflict. Maybe that's that niceness, maybe that's the kindness. I would attribute it a bit to how they think about the other person. When in conflict, particularly in high conflict situations, we tend to build a caricature of the other person. And that caricature is laden with stories we tell ourselves about them. We sort of look at them from across the room and say, "Oh, look at them. They're so irresponsible. They're so messy. They're doing that just to annoy me." And we're having these mental conversations with ourselves where we begin to convince ourselves of a narrative about the other person. And, going a little bit to the idea of a confirmation bias, right? That we then look for more evidence that supports our pre-existing hypothesis. Well, if I believe my spouse is financially irresponsible, now my brain will psychologically look for all of the evidence to support my pre-existing hypothesis, which is only going to reinforce that negative caricature of a belief. If we contrast that with having positive thoughts about someone, having that kindness or niceness or Gottman's positive sentiment override, that's a tremendous change factor for folks. That goes well beyond, by the way, having the right tools.
That seems like it would. And I was thinking, when you're talking about people that are reaching just for like the tips, the tools, the strategies, something about that reminds me of people who will like do a short-term diet or do like a really intensive, like the day we're recording this, it's in the middle of what's traditionally known as dry January. A lot of people give up alcohol for the month of January, not really with any long-term plans at not drinking or not really going for any life change, just going for like, hey, it's something to do, that sort of thing. And I get the sense sometimes some people, they want the quick fix. That's not a one for one match. I mean, a lot of tips, tools, strategies, they're not quick and they're not easy. But there's a difference, I think, between reaching for, well, what's a tool from out there that I can reach for versus what's change that I can bring about in here, especially long-term change. And it feels like there's a difference between people who like reach for some sort of trendy, Instagrammable like marriage hack versus like actual life transformation, or I want to change and grow as a person, or I want to put in long-term sustained effort. And so, and it seems like something like having these underlying attitudes. You talked about these underlying postures of grace, of compassion, of forgiveness toward a person. Like those aren't quick. Like those aren't things you can just like conjure. And those definitely aren't things you can just sustain if they're not real. Like those are the fruits, the byproducts of a lot of internal labor and a lot of investment and a lot of time. So it kind of feels like, yeah, there's no quick fix for a good marriage.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And maybe couples counseling in some of its best form is about building and reinforcing those positive habits, those positive, neural pathways, right? The reinforcing of those neural pathways. If we apply this to looking at couples work from a stress response orientation. When couples are in conflict, they're stressed. And when we're stressed, we revert back to a familiar pattern of behavior. So even if a couple knows better, the moment they're in conflict, they go back to what's familiar. So really, just knowing these tools, even the ones that you and I are talking about, going, okay, I'm gonna not use pseudo feelings. I'm going to say feel lonely and use core emotions. What we end up often finding is that's all well and good when you're calm and steady and all of that, but when you're stressed, you revert back to what's familiar. So it's practicing this to the extent that the new language, the new healthy behavior actually becomes the new normal, or the new default when you are in a stressful circumstance.
Yeah, yes, I agree. Factoring the stress response, or there's something about stress. It activates these more primal parts of the brain, and it does tend to take us back to like the skills we were first learned in childhood, or our own lowest common denominator. So, uh, uh, if we want to stay up in the front brain, stay up in like the higher functioning, the more complex thought, that takes practice, and it takes a lot of intentionality, and which means effort. So yeah. Um yeah. Well, I'm appreciating this, getting a sense for, again, kind of how do we define like high conflict couples and some of the things that are facing them. There's definitely these cycles they fall into that are very informed by history. I mean, no couple gets in high conflict out of a context, or by accident. So factoring all that in seems really important. Um, and it seems like we're kind of landing on this idea that, um, tips, tricks, tools, those are good. Community's good. Tools are good, or books, reading books is good. Counseling is good. But every couple is going to have to draw on a unique combination of all of those that works for them, and it's going to be different. Like, and I appreciate you pointing out there are no magic bullets in any of this. It's it's a lot of work either way. Um, yeah. So another thought, in working with some couples, here's where we get to be a little bit philosophical, because couples will sometimes talk about like compatibility, or I just don't feel it, or I'm not in love anymore, or and sometimes I'll talk with somebody who's like, well, should I stay with this person or not? I mean, things aren't too bad, but like, is he really the one? Is she really the one? Like, do we really love this person? And uh, and and somewhere in there, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety and attachment, and preoccupation issues that go into that too. But somewhere in there, I feel like it might be useful to think about, well, when we talk about love, like being in love, falling in love, do I really love this person or not? Um, that seems like it's its own sort of buzzword. I'd be curious, when sentiments like that come up for you, like how do you walk a couple through that, or how do you explore, what is love after all?
Uh, that's a tall order, Reese. You ask me to solve these philosophical underpinnings in the context of our conversation. No, but I think it's valid, right? There's a lot of ideas associated with love, and I think one of the things that has made it a prevailing challenge is love has so many facets. Love has so many definitions, right? And love is going to look different in different contexts. We think of parental love, family love. I think we're making reference specifically to this romantic or erotic love, between two people, or um, so in that context. I think it's helpful, instead of trying to make to craft a one succinct Webster's dictionary definition to prevail through the ages. I would conceptualize love, and I often do with couples, as a nuance of both expression and experience. That there is an element of love that is something that you experience, and there is an element of love that is something that you express. And it's helpful, at least in helping couples just recognize, among many facets, those two things. And in terms of the experience, a really tremendous thing that I try to help folks come to terms with is we put a lot of stake into some of the statements that you made. Is this person the one? Is it who God wants for me? Or is it who I'm destined to be with? Are they my other half? And some of that language is really romanticized. We put a lot of investment into finding this other half. It's you made reference to this right now when we're recording this. It's January, February. Boy, Valentine's Day. Lots of things are find your soulmate, your other half, all of those things. There's a market for what's referred to as the missing piece market. Look for your missing piece, your other half, because it sells. And that being largely fostering codependent ideologies aside, maybe we can talk about that in a subsequent conversation. Really, this idea then becomes that you're finding someone to complete you, and the moment you're finding someone to complete you, you're saying that you're coming as a half of a person at most, and it really devoids you of the responsibility of working on yourself. So when coming back to the experience of love, I point out to folks that they can do and often do a tremendous amount of talking themselves into loving someone. We see middle school kids do this when they have a crush and they look at someone from, across the schoolyard. Maybe I'm painting a certain type of picture, but they look at someone across the schoolyard who they've never had any interactions with, but they love everything about them. They're like, look at the way they walk and the way they chew gum and the way they do this. I just love everything. What they've done, this what we call like infatuation, is they've talked themselves into loving them. It's not dissimilar, by the way, to that positive sentiment override, the story you tell yourself about the other person. So that's the experience of love. And when someone says, I've fallen out of love for someone, it's often, at least in part, having to do with that caricature or narrative that I made reference to earlier. And then there's this whole other side about an expression of love. And that's, how love is communicated, how it's demonstrated. When we talk about love being a choice, sometimes that's involved in that conversation too, where despite how I'm feeling, I'm choosing to love. That's in the conscious expression of.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Yeah, love it. Love is a narrative I tell myself. Love is a choice. Love is a practice. And in there too, you get a sense for that there is this missing piece market. It kind of speaks to our deeper needs of attachment, and they really do believe like our most fundamental need is for a relationship. To see and be seen, to know and be known, to love and be loved. Part of us being made in the image of God is how beings like us work. So yes, there's a lot there, and I would sometimes love to come and hash out some things about codependency and attachment, because that's another fun buzzword that is poorly misunderstood, but it would be good. Well, no, there's a lot we've talked about, and probably a lot to digest. So we'll have to plan a sequel or something. But in the meantime, if a listener wanted to connect with you, find you on social media, the internet, the world, what are some good venues for connecting with you?
Yeah, absolutely. A few different resources. Ones we mentioned at the top of our conversation. Our counseling practice, located in Vancouver, Washington, is Ally Christian Counseling. It can be found at allychristiancounseling.com. More for professional resources is Ally Academy Northwest. That's allyacademynw.com. And we also have a variety of just resources and videos on YouTube as well at Ally Academy NW.
Awesome. So if you need an ally in life and in your relationship, head to Vancouver or to YouTube, and all things will be answered there. Likewise, to continue to stay connected to this show. So we're on YouTube, New Pattern Counseling, also on Instagram at New Pattern Counseling. Also, you can support us through Patreon at patreon.com/outer circle. And that's where we're at. And so do like, love, rate, review, share the show with a friend, and we'll definitely be back with more conversations soon. So thank you, Jeremiah.
Yeah, thank you, Reese. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.